Design is about the dance. I love the dance.
It can be a little bit of a fight.
It's always a degree of compromise.
Someone comes by your desk and say, that's just not quite right.
Then things change,
You make a cool gun,
things morph,
the next thing you know, it's a flamethrower.
things completely get cut.
Once you giveth, and it taketh away.
The design process is not just driven by the story, and it's not just driven by the gameplay.
The development cycle revolves around missions. So at the beginning, when we're concepting missions, you fill it with some sort of challenge.
When I first start out a mission, I will try to get a good high-level set of goals of enemies, weapons, and events. The first phase is repulse the Covenant. And then the second phase, we're trying to have it so the player expands their territory that they have and pushes the neutral and the enemy territory back.
And then the third part of an encounter is what you might call chopping off the head of that encounter. You're really trying to get to the end of the level. There may be a brute chieftain that you've been working your way towards, or a wraith tank.
Once we sort of nail that down at the highest level, we think about what are the cool experiences you can have in that mission with those characters.
2 guys against the player might be tough, but 2 guys against the player when the player has this weapon is suddenly an easy encounter. So now you can put 4 guys in there.
It'd be cool if the Phantom dropped off a sniper jackal.
The idea for a mission can start in lots of different places. Sometimes there's some really cool environment that we want to feature.
We had the notion of starting the game in a jungle from the very get-go.
Engineering grasped onto, like, that's going to take a lot of cool rendering, and artists grasped onto that and said that's going to allow for some really cool artwork. Design grasped onto it and said that's going to really sell the gameplay on that first mission.
Here is the first drawing of the jungle, the first mission in the game. We tried to indicate that the early areas would be used for basic movement training, and then moving into combat training, then eventually advanced combat where grenades are introduced and the player's introduced to the concept of flanking. From this, we went to an actual whiteboard where a lot more detail was added in.
A whiteboard contains sort of a rough layout and a list of the different sandbox items that are going to be used in that mission.
Then we'll also start listing out more specifics about the encounters, like where the grunts will be introduced or where the Phantom is going to come in. From here, we went on to Illustrator, and after that, we went into building the mass outs in 3D Studio Max, and we were off and going.
I would say Halo 3 is more of an offense game. It's all about getting in the action.
You gain yourself more cover, you gain yourself a nice weapon, and that sort of starts tipping the scales in your favor.
Every mission has its own feeling, and you don't just get that sense of, oh, I'm going from room to room and just killing more guys.
What we did for this encounter, for example, is the player can take the primary path, which is straight ahead, and take the Covenant head on, or they can take this secondary path, which flanks around the Covenant. So it feels like the player kind of gets to choose from the beginning of the encounter what type of experience they want.
Having a player feel like he did the right choice is probably one of the most rewarding things you can do in a game.
The state we want to keep you in is this constant state of challenge where you're not succeeding, but you know next time if you just did a little bit better, you could.
Oh, come on, man. I'm not spazzing.
In a single-player game, you have relatively limitless control over the experience of the player.
In multiplayer, it's very much a conflict between live participants that you're duking it out with.
When the map design sort of evolves, it needs to be balanced.
Blue team, what are you doing? Oh, God!
If the blue team starts on one side and the red team starts on another, they sort of have an equal arena to play in.
What's a perfect Halo bunker or a tower or a bridge? We're trying to make these ideal little situations, and then from that little situation, put a couple of them together, and that sort of becomes a level.
Design is such a broad concept. Designing a mission could be, I draw on a piece of paper, hey, here's the basic layout. You might take into consideration things like line of sight. You know, you certainly don't want the player to stand at point 1 of the level and see the very end of the level.
We have 2 encounter spaces that can see each other, so all the objects and all the AI are active in both of them at the same time. I'm trying to block them off from each other without completely destroying some of the views that we worked really hard to capture. And when Marcus sees it, he's going to kill me.
We have a bunch of systems for telling exactly where the player is and then triggering some event in front of him.
The purpose of creating these invisible trigger volumes is to let the computer know where the player is. So this is a bird's eye view of the first encounter where the player is actually fighting Covenant in Outskirts. When the player enters from this side, they will enter this first trigger volume that might spawn enemies or cause a ship to explode in the distance. There's a few side trigger volumes where we have some enemies in those areas, and when the player enters this trigger volume, those enemies actually get afraid of the player, and they'll run away. This is how we would make a trigger volume. And let's say, for example, we want some enemies to spawn in this little basin down there. You would place a trigger volume, you can control the scale of it, and you would want to create a nice clean line that the player can't get around. You know the player's close to the ground, so they can't actually see over the hill, but you wouldn't want them to be able to stand here because they could actually see the enemies spawn, and they'd spawn out of nowhere. So you're always just looking for a line so that the player can't actually see what's happening. The player crosses a bend, they hit the new trigger volume, and that fight ensues.
If mission designers are like storytellers, I give them words like warthog and explosion to tell different stories.
The basic design for a weapon needs to be fun to shoot and fun to be shot at. The shotgun is all about close range, surprising people. A sniper rifle is long range. Spartan laser is about taking down vehicles.
My favorite weapon is the battle rifle.
I'm quite partial to the sticky grenade.
And that 3-shot burst just feels really powerful.
We create situations in which a weapon is going to be the best thing around. But we also do the reverse, where we give you a shotgun, and then the next encounter is going to be all long range, and then all of a sudden you have to find a different solution to the problem.
So for multiplayer, it's really sort of trying to get the weapons placed in the right locations on the map.
Stay in your VIP, guys.
How do I get up there?
In multiplayer, the players are going to do something that you don't expect. So there's a big difference in how you can react with weapons.
You're looking at how you can sort of balance a power weapon on one side of a map versus a different side of a map.
This is actually really, really hard to balance out and make fun every time because the placement is random and so is the weaponry.
On Valhalla, the Spartan laser is placed right in the center of the map so that each team has an equal chance at getting out to the center where you're taking a lot of risk. And once you've got it, then you're really powerful. It's kind of a gamble, but the payoff is pretty big if you're successful.
It was really getting hard to add new weapons because balancing 40 weapons, you're going to feel like you have a weapon that is a clone of another. So the direction that we took is we added a new set of really, really powerful weapons that you don't really keep for a long time.
We've got an entirely new kind of weapon, the turret weapon, where you walk up to a turret and you yank it off its tripod and then you're walking around and you're doing third person.
We just limited the amount of ammunition in the turrets because they're really too powerful.
As new events happen throughout the level, your objectives are often changing, like when the Scarab comes in, for example. You know, it's pretty clear that you've now got a new barrier to being able to complete your overall objective of the mission. In Halo 3, the Scarab is super dangerous. You've got to be smart about how you approach fighting it.
The Scarab was in Halo 2, but it was very scripted.
The way it was actually implemented in the game was boring as hell.
The design was horrible. Like it looked like a basket, like a handle. I'm going shopping. It's horrible.
When you're fighting the Scarab in Halo 2, you had to kill the 2 guys that were driving it, and then he died in a cutscene. That was pretty cool, but it wasn't part of the sandbox. One of the first things we were looking at for Halo 3 was, let's give it an AI, let's let it move about the environment completely freely, let's make it part of the sandbox.
So we want to make it as interactive as possible.
So not only is this thing trying to kill you and all of your allies, but it's almost its own encounter space. It's up to you to figure out exactly what you're going to do to take out that Scarab. If you don't figure it out, well, you're probably going to die.
The end of Halo 3 is the end of the entire trilogy, and we wanted to do something really awesome for the end.
Explosions!
Yes. You took me half an hour.
Oh God, no, you're not gonna make it.
You want me to drive?
Oh, I want you to fix it so that I won't die when I go full speed. What I was playing was the end in a very unpolished, very rough, very frustrating state.
You've got to build it, you got to play it, you got to say, it's not good, let's try it again.
Every step of the way, you know, I'm going, is this fun? Is it exciting?
As we get toward the end of the project, we're just making smaller changes, tweaking how much damage something does.
We have to make sure that the doorways are the right size.
How's the cover playing out?
We're the ones that have to wire it all up and make it work and make it fun.
Just a little more sped up, I think.
then ultimately you might have an encounter that plays great.
Jump off there. Jump off here. You should be able to land.
Oh, so close to making that jump. That's awesome.
Sometimes you stumble on it, sometimes you plan for it, but the most important thing is when you recognize it, that you covet it and that you keep it.
The shipping game is always an approximation of the perfect vision. I like not having to be the one who decides when I have to stop, because I would never stop if I had any choice. And then the game would slip and then we'd all get fired. And even then I wouldn't want to stop.